very fascinating platform called Women in Energy in Pakistan. As I understand, it's mostly an advocacy platform to sort of ensure integration of women in the energy space. Could you tell us briefly about what Women in Energy is?
Women in Energy is a network of women, of professional women in the energy sector. And we're not just focused on the energy, but we're also targeting the climate space at the moment as well. So more renewable energy as well.
I think half of the problem that we work around is trying to make a case for why we work on creating gender balance in the energy sector. We also have partnerships, industry linkages in the private sector in Pakistan. So Shams Power is one of our very active partner. Angro Energy Limited, we've worked with them on a joint recruitment drive with K Electric.
Sometimes you do need those very specific targets in order to meet the gender balance requirements as well, right? And that's something that you've seen as well with the fact that when you had this women in decarbonization specific targeted approach, that actually helped you have that gender balance as well. And that's something that we've observed as well when it comes to energy and climate.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this new episode of Political Economy This Week with Asad Ijaz Butt on New Wave Global. Ladies and gentlemen, I have with me two very interesting guests from this very fascinating platform called Women in Energy in Pakistan. As I understand, it's mostly an advocacy platform to sort of ensure integration of women in the energy space and to also sort of ensure that, women, the wonderful work that women are doing in the energy space is better represented. Let me introduce my guests. I have Maha Kamal with me, who's working as a policy and governance specialist in the climate space in Islamabad. She's also the co-chair of the Women in Energy. And I also have the founder of Women in Energy with me today, Nameerah Hameed, who works in the climate space in London. Let me welcome my guest. Hi, Nameerah. Hi, Maha. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Great. So who do I start with?
Maha.
All right. Okay, great. So Maha, thank you for joining again. And could you tell us briefly about what Women in Energy is? What does the platform aspire to do? And any sort of highlights of works that you've done in the recent past?
Sure. So Women in Energy is a network of women, of professional women in the energy sector. And we're not just focused on the energy, but we're also targeting the climate space at the moment as well. So more renewable energy as well. The work that we've done basically spans across 5 pillars. We firstly focus on increasing women's participation in STEM fields. Number 2, we ensure that women are essentially, when they are part of the environment, that recruitment policies are fair and women are well represented in the energy and climate space. And number 3, we focus on professional development and trainings and mentorship of women who are part of the sector and are part of the different organizations. Number 4, we focus on ensuring that retention is there, so that there are adequate policies for women in the energy sector that includes facilities like daycare, for example, having that representation there in the energy sector and ensuring that spaces are safe and respect gender parity. And lastly, but I think which is the most important role that we do is regarding policy and institutional change in the energy sector. So ensuring that there's normative change across the energy sector, that there is gender parity in the energy and climate space, and that over time there's institutional policy reform targeted to basically ensuring gender parity in the sector. So these are 5 pillars, and the framework that we apply on this is part of the We Power initiative, which is the World Bank's initiative for increasing women's participation in South Asia. I think Nameerah can add more to the work we do and our achievements.
Sure.
Thank you, Maha.
Sure. Please, Nameerah, please go ahead. Yes.
Thank you for setting the stage. I'll just add more to what Maha has already said, just to sort of show how stark the situation of gender balance imbalance has been in Pakistan. We participated in collecting data that was compiled in a 2018 study released by World Bank, which shows that the gender imbalance in Pakistan is bad overall in the professional sector, but in energy sector it's even worse. So women account for approximately 4.6% of total technical staffs. So this includes all the engineering posts and technical positions, and women are 3.6% of total staff. So these include the administrative posts as well. And
Yeah.
we see that this is far lower than the total average of female students graduating from engineering universities, which is 23%. So we see that there is a very steep pyramid happening in which the number of women in universities is slightly higher, but then it falls dramatically in the professional sector. And even within the professional sector, we see that there are more women in the younger positions, and it's a very steep slope for positions of leadership in the energy sector. So that's something that we're very, very aware of, and that's something that we work on. We're not very interested in just hiring women in admin posts in the energy sector. What we're really focused on working towards is having women in leadership positions in the energy and climate space in Pakistan.
So, Nameerah, since you mentioned, engineering, engineering positions, and you also talk about the industrial sector. So, when you say, women in energy, are we just limiting ourselves to the manufacturing and industrial sectors? Because I see there's great potential for integration of women within discos and power plants, and the wider energy sector, also perhaps within petroleum companies, because I see them being overly skewed towards hiring men. So do you how do you define the energy sector firstly, and do you include some of those verticals also?
Absolutely. So when we say energy, our definition of the energy sector is very wide. We include the traditional fossil fuel industry. We include the renewable energy industry. Solar and wind is big in Pakistan. We include the green urban and cities space in Pakistan, and also sort of the clean energy transition and climate action work. What we see here happening in Pakistan, which is reflective of the global trend as well, is that there are more and more women, especially younger women, joining these emerging climate action and green energy transition sectors, as opposed to the traditional fossil fuel sectors. And we find this a very interesting and very exciting opportunity, because the traditional oil and gas sectors would mostly hire people with engineering backgrounds. And, traditionally, these were males, the male population that was studying engineering and also then joining the professional sector. But what we see now is that this new and growing spaces which work on the energy transition and which work on climate action and climate finance, they require people with holistic backgrounds, so with a wide array of skill sets. And most of these people are, graduating in the last 5 years, in the last 10 years maximum. And they are graduating from universities with a much bigger skill set. And we see that there's a much better gender balance in the younger population joining. So it's hopeful for all of us that with this growing space of green energy transition and climate action, we'll see younger women joining in greater numbers.
Maha, would you like to add to that?
Absolutely. So it's it's a very diverse set of targets. Sorry, I think I got muted. So essentially, what we're actually targeting on is the fact that women are part of this broader energy sector, and it's not just limited to traditional manufacturing or oil and gas sector, but we've also covered renewable energy. What's also interesting is that we are interdisciplinary in a lot of ways. So for example, energy law is something that we also cover. Then it's also people working in energy policy and adjoining areas as well. So it's far reaching and again focused on creating that larger normative change in the energy sector when it comes to gender balance.
So apart from the engineering positions that Nameerah was just talking about, and I think point very well taken. But I've seen in the oil and petroleum sectors, the traditional oil and petroleum sectors that Nameerah was talking about, there are a lot of positions, especially strategic positions within these organizations that have a great impact on the direction of policy, are usually hiring people with, business administration kind of backgrounds, people with MBA type degrees, and a lot of these people at the, at the initial leg of their careers are working in the field and are going to, for instance, petrol pumps and stations in the field, and then, interacting with public. And I've talked to their managers, and they're mostly inclined to hire men because they think that, men would be able to sort of, go down to the field and meet people and do the longer work hours. So some of those perceptions also need to be changed. Do you think that that's one of the Achilles heel, and that's one of the big challenges that women in energy would need to overcome?
Nameerah, can you take that? Because I think our work largely focuses on increasing women in technical roles, but also leadership position. And that's something that we've also always encountered, the stereotype and the traditional fact that perhaps women will be less inclined in those roles or not suitable. So Nameerah, if you can perhaps highlight more on what we've done. I think we've done a lot specifically focused on that.
Absolutely. No, you're both absolutely right. I think half of the problem that we work around is trying to make a case for why we work on creating gender balance in the energy sector. And it's very disheartening because when we first started this work 5 years ago, we assumed that everyone knew why we're working towards creating gender balance. But most of the time, we're talking to public sector CEOs and chairmen of the boards and private sector CEOs and making a case for why they need gender balance in the companies and in their organizations. And so it comes down to the perception of roles of women, which unfortunately still poses a very big risk for gender balance. So one way that we tackle this perception and sort of working around creating a change in this perception is creating strategic partnerships with organizations, because we think that working just by ourselves was not creating results. So we create partnerships both in the public sector. So we have a partnership with the Government of Punjab Energy Department. We have a partnership with BAPDA. Then we also have partnerships, industry linkages in the private sector in Pakistan. So Shams Power is one of our very active partner. Engro Energy Limited, we've worked with them on a joint recruitment drive. With K Electric, they've been our corporate sponsor and collaborator because we find them to be a very progressive organization that is hiring a lot of female talent. So we feel the one way we're able to sort of shake the perceptions is creating partnerships with these organizations in which we sort of make them accountable to hiring women talent within their organizations, and that sort of results in achieving some results at the end of the year. We've also been doing consultancies for donor agencies because we feel that they have a lot of clout in the Pakistani sort of energy sector still. So when they approach us with working with them in creating their gender plan for the year or in running their innovation challenge for young women in energy, we're very, very happy to do so because it just sort of widens all the areas and all the industries and all the organizations where we want to have an impact.
Great. So all of that sounds wonderful. I mean, you've done way more than I thought you've done before this call, but just one more question, which any of you two could answer, is regarding the supply side, because I see a lot of demand side work has been done in terms of generating employment and establishing partnerships with the industry and the government. But are you also engaging with the academia and somehow ensuring that you create interest in women to join these professions and join these jobs and positions, and also, perhaps, sort of training women to take on some of these roles? So has some work been done towards, establishing linkages with the academia?
So I'll get started on this, and then perhaps Nameerah can add. Absolutely. So academic linkages and partnering with academia is absolutely central to the work we do. As we've already told you as well, that we actually see there is a problem of a leaky pipeline where we have graduates who are studying STEM fields, are pursuing engineering, and then when it comes to the actual hiring, there's a significant gap in terms of the percentage, and Nameerah already highlighted that earlier as well. So in order to tackle that, we do have ongoing partnerships across academia, but more specifically, we held Pakistan's largest online job fair, which actually focused on more than 1,500 plus women, and other partners actually attended this platform in order to not only learn about the range of jobs that were available in the energy sector, and in basically STEM fields, but rather specifically improve those linkages between academia and the industry, the gap where there is a pool of talented women, but there's that gap that we're seeing. So we try to target that and fix that problem as well. And ongoing, we do partner with academic institutes. We have we basically have help in job fairs, creating awareness campaigns, information sessions, and improving that linkage between industry and academia. Nameerah, if there's anything I've missed, please feel free to jump in.
No, those are really great examples of the work that we've been able to do. And again, it was through demand that we created these new projects over time. We started with very low-hanging fruits in the first year of our work, and then we sort of started becoming more ambitious towards our fifth year. I don't know if you mentioned Maha, but we also partnered with a local company in Lahore to co-create with other partners a solar PV technicians training, engineers and technicians training, because there was a great demand for more talent within these companies. And then there weren't enough women who had sort of on-ground, hands-on training, practical training. So clearly we saw this gap, and we wanted to work with our partners to fill that gap, to make sure that if the academia side was sort of wasn't preparing women enough for the jobs that were available, so this certificate program we hoped would fill it. So I mean, one measure of success that we have for ourselves is that 1/3 of the graduating trainees from our program were offered jobs within the first 3 months, and then others were offered jobs throughout the year. So we feel continuing such programs with our partners is a great addition to the industry.
Yeah, I mean, as Nameerah, as I see this, I mean, somewhere down the lane, you know, these donor organizations or consulting places, even perhaps the corporate sector, I see women in energy as a platform where, you know, each of these firms or these industries, if they need somebody with, you know, a certain skill set in energy or engineering, you know, they sort of approach the women in energy, and they you know, route their labor demand through your platform. And then on the supply side, universities, and, you know, there's a big pool of women candidates in various universities that send their CVs to you, and you have a big repository of CVs that you can select from. So I mean, if it can become that sort of a routing platform, then I guess you could potentially do great service to you know, young people looking for jobs. Is that something that you would want to graduate towards?
Well,
That's something that
absolutely.
we did.
Actually,
Sorry, go on, Maha.
Moment. Please, Nameerah, go ahead.
I'll just quickly say a sentence
Yeah.
and give it back to you. That's something that was the idea which we did with the online job fair, because there were so many companies that were approaching our leadership chairs with vacancies. And at the same time, there were a lot of graduating and young professionals and also graduating students reaching out to us with sort of you know, if we could take a look at their CVs and pass it on to our industry linkages. And we saw that there was a big gap in it, sort of there wasn't any direct linkage between these graduates with very good degrees and the vacancies in these good organizations. So we started collecting CVs and matching them with companies. But more than that, I feel like even in addition to vacancies, we also hold a repository of women experts in the various energy fields and offer them and suggest them as speakers on high level panels, because we feel like a lot of the decision making or um, a lot of the conversations are being held in all male manners, and that's where sort of more spotlight is given to experts in the field. And we started making sure that organizers of conferences and panels would reach out to us for recommendations and suggestions of women to speak at these panels as well. So that's in addition to the vacancies that we did.
Yeah, so absolutely. Just to add to that, so we focus on filling the gap between vacancies that are available and CVs that we already have as well. And we do maintain an ongoing repository as well. In addition to that, as Nameerah has already told you, we focus on filling the gap when it comes to panels, but also board memberships is something that we focus on and have actively recommended people to be on boards for energy companies as well to improve that gender balance when it comes to the leadership positions. Additionally, we were also asked to nominate engineers for this Council of Engineers for the Energy Transition, which is an independent advisory council to the United Nations Secretary General as well. So that's very high level. And our nominee actually got offered that position as well as part of the council. So we do tackle it at a very micro level as well, but also at the global level. We try to fill that entire gap to ensure gender parity at all levels. And specifically, leadership is something that we're absolutely focused on, because studies have shown that having those role models in high level positions plays an active role in helping that gender balance. So that's something that we absolutely target on.
Wonderful. So I'll move on to my next question. That's regarding decarbonization. There's an increasing focus on decarbonization in Pakistan. The World Bank did a decarbonization study, and I was part of the team that was doing that work, and I have firsthand experience of how it was done. And one of the lessons that the bank was able to glean out of it was that there was absolutely no representation of women in many of these, decarbonization related activities that we were performing in the industry. So we picked 5 industries in Pakistan: steel, textile, cement, and there was absolutely no female women representation. And also perhaps even within the teams that were doing the study. So, even perhaps our own team that was working in the field, conducting energy audits, had no female representation. So the bank then, learned a lesson from the decarbonization study and floated another bid that was called Women in Decarbonization Roles. And then they wanted us to sort of identify how, women could be integrated within the entire decarbonization chain, and, how one could establish forward and backward linkages with the decarbonization process and see where women fit into that chain. So, I don't know if you've looked at that study. I mean, it might be a work in progress now at the bank, or you've talked to the bank about it. That's an area where women in energy, I think, could be, you could be potentially useful. So I don't know if you've had a look at that.
Oh, absolutely. So that's something we do focus on. And what's interesting is sometimes you do need those very specific targets in order to meet the gender balance requirements as well, right? And that's something that you've seen as well, with the fact that when you had this women in decarbonization specific targeted approach, that actually helped you have that gender balance as well. And that's something that we've observed as well when it comes to energy and climate, that when companies actually set targets that are very specific in tackling that gender balance, that is when they're actually able to meet those goals as well. So part of the ongoing work is creating that gender balance throughout different organizations, but also we do work very closely with companies that want to improve their overall gender parity as well. So we have worked specifically with companies, human resource departments, in order to ensure that their entire structure is is filling that gap, but also working with multilateral institutions such as the World Bank, such as UNDP, USAID, and other organizations that have that vision of creating greater gender equity and ensuring that there's that trickle down effect in terms of those overarching goals as well. But what is important is that it really needs to be bottom up to be sustainable. And that's something that we do focus on, that companies themselves have that local context, have that understanding of why it's important to have that gender balance to begin with. Because we've observed that if you have that just a top-down target where it's perhaps pushed by a multilateral institution or other goal, what happens is that that normative change sometimes does not happen. That's actually required to create that culture where women not only feel that they've filled a specific quota, but that they're actually included and feel welcome in their organizations, and having that change, that normative change, is absolutely important to ensuring that women actually are retained in that organization. So you need that culture of change, and that needs to be happening bottom up for it to be sustainable.
Right. So thinking of change, I mean, we focused a bit on the challenges that women face in the energy sector, but there are also challenges that the energy sector itself faces, and I think one great sort of means for integration would be that there are lacks in in terms particularly in terms of capacity in the energy sector. And if one could identify areas where the energy sector in Pakistan lacks in particular, especially in terms of technical capacity, and women could be trained in those areas, and you just pick those 2-3 big areas and women are trained in those areas, and then you just pitch a batch of women trained in those areas to the government, to the policy makers, to fill those gaps. And I think those could, that could really fit into the larger agenda, and then also, solve some of those energy sector problems that Pakistan faces. So for instance, I was, for the past few years, I've been thinking about, something called potential studies in Pakistan, which are being done by many energy sector consultancies like Navigant or ICF all over the world, which basically advises the government on the level of subsidy that it should provide to various energy efficient technologies. And most of these studies are based on something called the potential model. And I've talked to a lot of experts within Pakistan, and this potential modeling is very technical work, and consultancies have developed very, very extensive analytical models, robust models to do this kind of work. So that got me thinking that if a batch of women could be trained to do these kind of works, that could sort of provide them a great head start and comparative advantage, and could also solve the larger problems in the energy sector. What are your thoughts on that? Nameerah, we could start with you.
I take your point in sort of we should identify sectors within the larger energy sector where we train women enough to be able to fill the required skills gap. The sort of the very simple activities that we did was identifying that solar PV installation was one area where there was a lot of demand in the last 5 years, and clearly there weren't enough sort of engineers and technicians for it. The other area where I believe companies and sort of donor organizations work in is energy efficiency, and sort of applying that to buildings and appliances. So that's another area where trainings were being given. But I take your point that it would be very, very interesting and fruitful to identify sort of larger areas, which I mean areas where more jobs would be created in the next 10 years as well, not just old industries, but also in the next 10 years. So identifying where's the job market going, and then preempting it by already creating a cohort of women that's ready to take on those positions.
Wonderful. Maha, would you like to add to that? You're on mute, Maha.
Yeah, so just to add to that, absolutely, we do see some skills already identified, and there's a green. We overall see the reskilling gap as well. For example, we've been working on green jobs, for example, with the UNDP, specifically focused on broader areas within the energy and climate space where there was a gap, and that specific area targeted. So we basically had an innovation challenge which focused on that skill gap, and then tried to fill that through this other approach, which wasn't necessarily through trainings, but it was through an innovation challenge that specifically focused on that area, which is a gap that we're seeing, that, okay, green jobs are the need of the future. What is the gap that we're seeing at the moment? What would potentially be advisable in this is our partnerships with academia, because they already have those already graduates ready to be trained, but they are seeing that gap where the needs of the future, the job market, the skill gap is there. And how can we transition that? So part of the work that we did was actually helping a public sector university work on their curriculum as well. And that was specifically focused from a gender angle as well. But what we can do, and that would be something that is useful that comes out of this conversation today, is deepening our linkages with academia and having more of an advisory role in curriculum as well, that can perhaps fill that reskilling gap. Because at the moment we're doing the solar trainings, and we had a fellowship program in mind as well that specifically focuses on technical skills, so through workshops, but perhaps that is a little micro, and what would be more sustainable in the future would be working with academia, so having those longer programs, but identifying the skill gap and then tackling that. So that's something that's very useful. Thank you for the idea.
Sure. So in terms of engaging with the academia, I mean, something that comes to mind is that, talking about energy, there's an obvious focus on, departments that are associated with energy related education, of course, engineering departments in big public universities, of course. But many of these public universities also now have women and gender departments also. Yeah. And in my experience, I mean, a lot of those departments, of course, their ultimate focus is to ensure gender balance and integration of women in the workspaces and the labor market. But women sort of graduating out of many of such departments in public universities are confined to a few roles. I see a lot of them, joining teaching roles in public and local schools after graduating from those universities. In fact, I was part of a study that talk to women from those departments. So I think potentially, apart from engineering departments or even departments that, teach energy policy or energy studies, we could potentially talk to graduates or final year students potentially of gender studies departments in many public universities. How do you think? How do you see this as an idea or a focus for women in energy?
Absolutely. I think part of the problem is having mainstreaming gender is of absolute importance, whether it's at the energy sector or, for example, data science as like this upcoming field, which is again having that gender imbalance. So absolutely working with like-minded people within gender departments is of absolute importance. And that was part of our work with the public sector university I was telling you about as well. It was specifically focused on that curriculum design within a gender studies program. They wanted to focus on gender and energy as one area that was specifically lacking. But of course, we need to do that with other universities as well. So we just had one public sector university partner for this work, but of course we need to expand our ambit. What must be noted, Asad, is that Women in Energy Pakistan is a voluntary organization. And all of us, our 7 core member team, we have full-time ongoing roles in other things as well. So because it's a voluntary initiative, oftentimes the work that we do is driven out of a sense of passion and the urgent need that this is
Of
something
course.
that needs to be worked on. But as an organization, we're very small to have that kind of deeper change. So we do, that's why we have our amazing partners who help us scale our ideas.
Sorry, my questions are seemingly sort of expecting a lot out of a small team. Of course, I do understand, and but I expect Women in Energy to become a big thing in future, and hopefully you'll do much bigger things. And of course, kudos to the small team that's managing the workload so far. But I'll thank you, Maha, for that explanation. But I'll move on to my next question, which would potentially be my last question. We're approaching the end of the show. So as both of you would know that, there's now another focus of the international donor agencies and so on and so forth, also of the Pakistani government now with the new climate change policy coming out, which is on the just transition. Do you think that, with this great focus on inclusion and participation, and, with just transition now coming into the mainstream, do you see that there is great potential for platforms like Women in Energy? And do you have a plan to integrate sort of Women in Energy and the work you're doing within the overall ambit of the just transition?
Nameerah, would you like to highlight that? Because a lot of our work is part of the just transition. So I would like you to highlight what we do.
Absolutely. What I started sort of towards the beginning of the conversation was that we see more and more women joining this sector just because we see younger women more more interested and also sort of more passionate about just transition and climate action. And this isn't just in Pakistan, but we see a global reflection of this, that younger women genuinely do care about climate action and clean energy transition much more than we traditionally see sort of in the older male population. So that's very hopeful, because a lot of the activism work that's happening on the streets, a lot of the institutional change happening within organizations is being led by younger women, and I feel like it's a very exciting space to be in right now, that we have this a very talented population with very interesting and very applicable degrees that also genuinely and like very passionately care about the future of this planet and where we're going in terms of accountability of fossil fuel industry, and integration of more renewable energies within our energy space. So I feel like this is just the beginning of a very very hopeful energy sector and the sort of larger climate and transition sector.
Best of luck, Nameerah. Any parting words, Maha, on this one?
Sure. So just to add to what Nameerah was saying, we actually have observed that the just transition, this movement towards greater renewable energy, a greener, more sustainable future, is actually great for gender balance as well, because studies from the IRENA, which is the International Renewable Energy Agency, have shown that 22% women were employed by the fossil fuel industry, but it's 32% women in the renewable energy, and it's just getting started. So absolutely, we do see that the future is more inclusive, and there are continued efforts to ensure gender parity in a greener future. And it's not just to have a check mark. There's actually studies that show that having more inclusive, a just transition is actually good for the entire planet. So that's absolutely wonderful, and that's the goal.
Thank you for your valuable insights on the sector and the work that Women in Energy is doing in Pakistan. We've unfortunately reached the end of the show, but we'd carry the conversation forward. And thank you very much for joining me, both of you.
Thank you so much for hosting us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.